Hey everyone.
Hello.
Okay, welcome back to pdcst-corrupt.mov. And today we will unpack scandals, power, and the stories behind the headlines. Today's episode is titled Danantara, Next One MDB, or Temasek. Joining me are two guests, Bradley, an independent financial investigator who's been deep into the 1MDB case and is now watching Indonesia closely. And we have also Reynard,
Hello, guys.
a researcher focused on public fund accountability and governance in Southeast Asia. Bradley, before we dive into Danantara, can you set the stage for us? I heard you got a story about Hollywood and Malaysia corruption.
Absolutely. Let's rewind to the Wolf of Wall Street. I'm sure that probably most of you know that movie. Leonardo DiCaprio, wild parties, drugs, yachts. It was all outrageous. But here's the kicker. That movie was funded in part using stolen money from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund, 1MDB.
Wait, seriously?
Yes, Cholo, one of the masterminds behind the 1MDB scandal, laundered money through shell companies and used it to finance the film. So when you watch that movie, you're actually literally seeing stolen Malaysian public money on your screen.
That's wild.
You know, it gets actually even crazier. Over $4.5 billion vanished through bogus joint ventures, fake bond deals, and luxury shoppings. It's one of the biggest financial heists in modern history, or in fact, probably the biggest heists in the modern history.
And it's a perfect reminder of what can happen when sovereign funds operate without proper checks.
Right.
Alright, Bradley. Let's bring it to Indonesia. What exactly is Danantara?
Sure. Danantara, officially called the Indonesian Investment Authority, is Indonesia's new sovereign wealth fund. It launched in 2024 to attract foreign money, think infrastructure projects, toll roads, energy and digital stuff. Basically, Indonesia wants big development without draining its own budget.
Okay, but I keep hearing people comparing Danantara to both Temasek and 1MDB. What's going on there?
Well, Danantara wants to be like Temasek. I mean, probably most of some kinds of that company wants to be like Temasek. It's Singapore super efficient, super transparent wealth fund. But in practice, it unluckily shares more the early structural similarities with 1MDB, especially around how decisions are made and who is watching the books.
And also in terms of political connections, the people in charge were voted by the government without an independent process. So there's risk of it becoming a political tool than a purely economic one.
Let's get into 1MDB for a second. For those who only know it through the Wolf of Wall Street story, what actually happened?
Okay, so 1MDB started off looking honestly innocent. Malaysia wanted to fund development, but behind the scenes, Cholo, these shadowy figures with no formal title, I must say. Like, if you know, Cholo don't have any formal titles in the 1MDB corporation's structures. He was working with the system. He created fake deals with fake companies, laundered money through offshore banks, and funneled it into luxury assets, condos, art, private jets, and yeah, even the Hollywood movie Wolf of Wall Street. Like, if you may ask, how did he do that? Because he's a very close friend with Najib Razak, the then Prime Minister of Malaysia. So even though he don't have any formal positions, he can still influence Najib's, let's just say, decisions to use the company.
Okay, so for the Hollywood movie, when I watch that movie, I'm actually watching stolen money.
Yes, that's exactly. And it's actually very ironic, honestly, how the story tells us about Wolf of Wall Street's frauder, let's just say. The metaphor of a corrupt man, Jordan Belfort himself, which lives in untouched and receives very little punishment despite siphoning more than millions of dollars, was actually funded by a man who stole the ordinary Malaysians' money, Jolo, who up until now was still a free man, with still seen occasionally roaming the streets of Taipei, New York, and even still happily gambling in Macau.
And moreover, in a case study in how we oversight and too much secrecy can lead to massive debt. One entity handled in the independent government because the Prime Minister chaired it, and auditors were replaced when they asked too many questions.
Okay. So it wasn't just one bad actor?
No, definitely. It's more than two, and probably quite a lot of factors. It was more like a whole system that allowed the fraud to happen. And that's why people are watching Danantara so closely.
Danantara's big pitch is foreign capital. They say it's the UAE, the US, and Japan are all coming in. Sounds like a win, right?
It can be, but I think here's the thing. One MDB also attracted those big foreign money. That didn't stop it from turning into a black hole. If the deals aren't transparent, then you don't know where the money is going.
And foreign investors just want returns. They're not always asking the hard question, except for the host country to keep things clean.
So any deals with Danantara that feels off?
I think if I remember, there are whispers about infrastructure's project being rushed. Some may lack the proper public feasibility studies. Nothing confirmed, honestly, but when deals are closed doors, I think it's hard to tell.
Okay, so we just have to trust that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I must say that's actually the very core of the problem because if we trust something blindly without transparency, that's a recipe for disaster.
Let's flip it. Temasek in Singapore. Everyone says it's the ideal model. Why does it work?
Well, because it has something that probably one MTB and Danantara don't have. It has credibility. It has transparency. It's independently run. It has real financial reporting and it's accountable to the parliaments of Singapore. Every year, they publish audit reports. Investors trust it because it acts like a professional firm, not a government propagandist used tool.
And its culture is different. In Singapore, they've built institutions that outlast political cycles because the decisions are made based on merit, not loyalty.
So Danantara can't just copy the structure, huh? It needs to build the culture as well.
Bingo. But that's the hard part, actually.
So let's get practical. If Danantara starts going sideways, what signs should we look out for?
I think the first signs that we should look is audit reports. Because if the reports are delayed for long, long times or never published, that's actually a very red flag. If the top officials suddenly resign, change, or if we hear about massive investment, but no financial details, no reality on the field, that's when we should worry.
Also, if foreign partners start backing out, that means that we're seeing something that they're seeing as a risk, but we're not being told about.
Got it. Missing audits, secret deals, people jumping ships, not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say people in power are listening. What should they do to make Danantara safer?
I think they should start with transparency, like publish all the details, get real audits, involve independent financial experts, not only politicians, and let Parliament have the oversight to see the transparency of the company.
Also, including civil society, open up channels for journalists, academics, and watchdogs to ask questions. Because if you want trust, you have to earn it.
Okay. So can Danantara still succeed?
Well, if anything we must say is still like there is possibilities for them to succeed. It's also what we are hoping, but only if it commits to doing things differently from the system that it was created.
So we've talked about Hollywood movies, sovereign funds, political pressure, and the fine line between ambition and abuse.
But it all comes down to one question, right? Who's watching the money?
And who gets to ask questions without fear?
Well, as the then founding fathers of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew once said, If you do not know history, whether your own or others, you are bound to think short term and not for the long term and generations ahead. It is uttermost important for us to analyze on what happened to other countries like Malaysia and Singapore so that we can think critically as we are of similar people and culture, therefore very similar things could happen to either one MPB or Temasek.
That's it for the extended episode of podcast Corrupt.mov. Danantara isn't doomed, but the story isn't written yet. Thanks for tuning in. We can only hope for the best.